The hallways of the new high school felt like a different planet. For Anya, who had spent most of her life in the quiet, focused world of practice rooms and concert halls, the constant noise was a shock. It was a river of sound, a chaotic mix of shouting laughter, the slam of metal lockers, the squeak of sneakers on polished floors, and the distant, rhythmic bounce of a basketball in the gym. It all swirled around her, but she moved through it like a ghost. Her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum tiles ahead of her. She wasn't trying to be rude. She was trying to be invisible. That was the whole point of this move, this fresh start. To just be a normal girl, not the girl whose fingers could dance across 88 keys and make people weep. Her first stop was the administrative office, a room that smelled like old paper, weak coffee, and a hint of floor wax. A woman with kind eyes and a stack of files on her desk greeted her with a tired smile. "New student, right, Anya? Let's get you sorted." The woman typed away at her computer, her brow furrowed in concentration. Your transcripts from your old school seem to be delayed in the system." "It happens." "No worries." She clicked a few more keys, then looked up. "We just need to get you into a full schedule. You need an arts elective. The only one with an open spot this late in the semester is Intro to Piano. Is that all right? We can always switch you later when your files come in." Anya's heart did a little flip, a strange mix of panic and pure, unadulterated relief. Piano, it was the one thing she knew better than anything. The one thing that had defined her entire life. The thought of walking into a beginner class felt like a fraud, a lie. But then a different thought bloomed in her mind, warm and comforting. A beginner class. No expectations. No one would know her name or her history. No one would look at her and see the prodigy who had played on grand stages since she was small. They would just see a new girl who didn't know how to play. She could feel the tightness in her chest, a feeling she'd carried for years, begin to loosen just a little. "That's fine," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "That's perfectly fine." The counselor printed out her schedule with a satisfying whir of the dot matrix printer and handed it to her. The crisp paper felt like a passport to a new life. Anya took it, her fingers tracing the words, "Intro to Piano, room 214, Mr. Harrison." She walked out of the office and toward the music wing, the sounds of the main hallways fading behind her. With each step, she felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just a scheduling error. It was a gift. It was a chance to put down the heavy weight of her talent, just for a little while, and remember what it felt like to not have to be perfect. Room 214 was at the end of a quiet corridor. The air here smelled different of wood polish, old sheet music, and the faint, dusty scent of instrument cases. She pushed the door open and saw a room filled with rows of electric keyboards, each on its own stand. A few students were already there, chatting and laughing. At the front stood a man with a friendly, slightly weary face, who was meticulously arranging a stack of music books on a piano. This had to be Mr. Harrison. He looked up as she entered and gave her a welcoming nod. "New face? Come on in. Find a spot anywhere you like." Anya chose a keyboard in the back corner, tucking herself away from the others. She watched as the rest of the class trickled in. They were a motley crew, a mix of kids who looked genuinely excited and others who were clearly just there to fill a credit requirement. One boy immediately started tapping out a loud, clumsy rhythm on the plastic keys, while a girl next to him stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Anya felt a strange sense of kinship with them. They were all here at the starting line. Mr. Harrison clapped his hands gently to get the class's attention. "All right, everyone, welcome to Intro to Piano. My name is Mr. Harrison, and my goal for this semester is simple, to help you find a little bit of joy in making music. No pressure, no judgment. We all start somewhere." He smiled, and it was a kind, genuine smile that made the room feel a little safer. "Now, let's get our hands on these keys. I want you to find middle CC the label. Good. Now we're going to learn a very simple, very famous song. Hot Cross Buns." A few groans and a few giggles went through the class. Mr. Harrison chuckled. Yes, I know. But every master pianist once played hot cross buns. Let's just get our fingers moving. He played the simple three-note melody, his fingers moving with an easy grace that Anya knew came from decades of practice. Okay, your turn. Just the first three notes? EDC. Anya took a deep breath. This was it. Her performance. Not for an audience of thousands, but for an audience of one Mr. Harrison, and for herself. She placed her fingers on the keys, her posture instinctively perfect, her back straight, her wrists relaxed. Then she remembered her role. She deliberately slumped her shoulders just a little. She let her wrists fall. She looked down at the keyboard with an expression of intense, slightly confused concentration, as if the letters and numbers were a foreign language. She pressed down on the keys for E, D, and C. The notes came out, but they were hesitant and slightly off the rhythm. She even added a little jarring pause between the D and the C, a classic beginner's mistake. It felt strange, almost wrong, to be playing so badly on purpose. But it also felt incredibly liberating. She glanced up at Mr. Harrison. He was walking around the room, leaning over to help a student who was looking for the right key. He caught her eye and gave her a small, encouraging smile. "Good start," he said softly as he passed by. "Just try to keep the rhythm steady. You've got this." He had completely bought it. To him, she was just Anya, the quiet new girl who was trying her best to figure things out. He saw exactly what she wanted him to see. As the class went on, practicing the simple tune over and over, Anya continued her careful act. She made tiny, deliberate errors, always correcting herself with a little frown, as if she were genuinely struggling. The other students around her were making plenty of real mistakes, so her own few faked ones blended right in. She listened to the messy, imperfect symphony of a dozen beginners all learning at once, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt a smile reach her own eyes. The piano wasn't a golden cage or a pedestal to be guarded. Here, in this room, it was just a toy. And she was just a beginner, a girl with a new schedule and a secret, wonderful chance to be normal. The weight on her shoulders felt lighter than it had in years, and she knew, with a deep and quiet certainty, that she was going to love this class. The first few weeks in Intro to Piano became a comfortable routine for Anya. She had mastered the art of being unremarkable. She would arrive a minute late, slip into her corner seat, and immediately adopt the slightly slumped posture of a disinterested teenager. When Mr. Harrison gave instructions, she would nod along with the same confused expression as her classmates. She played the simple songs, "Mary Had a Little Lamb," "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," with a deliberate clumsiness that was starting to feel almost natural. It was a performance, but it was an easy one, and the reward was the blissful anonymity that came with it. No one asked her about competitions. No one mentioned her past. She was just Anya, the quiet girl who was okay at the piano, but didn't seem to care much about it. But maintaining the lie was harder than it looked. Not because of what she had to do, but because of what she had to stop doing. Years of strict training had burned certain habits into her muscle memory. One day, Mr. Harrison was walking around the room, gently correcting students' posture. "Sit up straight," he'd say. "Your back should be a firm but relaxed line. Think of a string pulling you up from the top of your head." When he got to Anya, he paused. She was already sitting perfectly, her spine aligned, her shoulders relaxed. "Very good, Anya," he said with an approving smile. "You're a natural." Her heart jumped. She had forgotten to slouch. Quickly, she let her shoulders round forward and fidgeted on the bench, pretending his praise had made her self-conscious. "Oh, thanks," she mumbled, looking down at her keys. Mr. Harrison just chuckled and moved on, but the moment left her feeling shaky. It was a close call. Her hands were another problem. They knew exactly where to go, how to curve, how to strike the keys for the perfect tone. Faking beginner hands felt like trying to write with her left hand. She would hold them too stiffly or let her fingers flop awkwardly just to sell the act. It felt physically wrong, a constant, low-level battle between her body's memory and her mind's command. The real test came during a lesson on basic chords. The boy who sat next to her, a friendly, lanky kid named Leo, was having a terrible time. He was all thumbs, literally. His fingers would fumble and land on the wrong notes, producing a discordant thud instead of the clean C major chord Mr. Harrison was demonstrating. "Man, this is impossible," he groaned, dropping his hands into his lap with a frustrated sigh. "My fingers just don't want to do it." Anya looked at his hands, then at the keys. Without thinking, her own hand lifted from her keyboard. It moved through the air, a graceful arc, heading straight for his piano. Her index finger was poised to gently guide his thumb into the correct position, while her other fingers were ready to shape his hand into the proper form. It was an instinct, a gesture she had seen her own teachers do 1,000 times. It was pure muscle memory. Halfway there, her brain caught up with her body. "Asterisk, what are you doing?" A voice screamed in her head. She froze, her hand hovering awkwardly over his keyboard. Leo looked up at her, his expression confused. Anya's face flushed with heat. She quickly pulled her hand back and pretended to stretch, interlacing her fingers and pushing her palms out in front of her. My hand was getting a cramp," she stammered, avoiding his eyes. "Sorry." Leo just laughed, not suspecting a thing. "Yeah, tell me about it. These things feel like they're made of rocks." He went back to his clumsy attempts, and Anya let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her heart was pounding against her ribs. That was too close. Someone might have seen. Someone might have wondered why the girl who couldn't play a simple scale had the perfect, instinctive correction for a C major chord. The biggest crack, however, came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The class was working on rhythm, which was always a challenge. Mr. Harrison had them put their keyboards aside and just clap. "Okay, everyone, let's try this together," he said, writing a simple rhythm on the whiteboard, 4 even beats. The class clapped, a messy, uneven sound. Good, he said patiently. "Now let's add an 8th note. It looks like this. It's faster. 2 notes for 1 beat." He demonstrated the quick tate sound. The class tried again, and the result was even more chaotic. Some clapped too fast, some too slow, and some just gave up and clapped the original 4 beats. Anya was bored out of her mind. She clapped along with the simple rhythm, but her mind was elsewhere. It drifted back to a piece she had been learning before she moved, a fiery, complicated sonata filled with complex, syncopated rhythms that danced and clashed. She could hear it in her head, the storm of notes, the thunder of the left hand, the lightning-fast melody of the right. Lost in the memory, her right hand, which was resting on her knee, began to move. It wasn't clapping. It was tapping. Her fingers danced a frantic, intricate pattern against her Ginza complex, offbeat rhythm that had nothing to do with the simple ta-ti on the board. Her eyes were glazed over, staring out the window at the rain-streaked glass, a tiny, unconscious smile on her lips. She wasn't in a beginner piano class anymore. She was back on stage, with the lights warm on her face and the roar of the piano filling her world. From the front of the room, Mr. Harrison was watching his struggling students with a fond but weary expression. His eyes scanned the room, noting who was trying and who had given up. Then they landed on Anya. He saw her faraway look, the gentle smile. But then he saw her hand. It was moving with a speed and complexity that was absolutely baffling. The rhythm it was tapping was sophisticated, professional, and utterly out of place. It was the kind of rhythm a seasoned jazz drummer would play, not a kid who couldn't clap a steady beat. He stopped talking for a second, the class's clumsy clapping fading into the background. He just stared. It was only for a moment, but in that moment, the entire foundation of what he thought he knew about her crumbled. Anya snapped out of her daydream. She realized the room had gone quiet and that Mr. Harrison was looking directly at her. Her hand froze on her knee. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a jolt of pure panic. She quickly pulled her hand away and tucked it under her other arm, looking down at her desk as if she were deeply interested in a splinter in the wood. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. "All right, let's try that one more time, everyone. Together now." He turned back to the board, but the image of her hand, moving with such unconscious skill, was burned into his mind. It didn't make sense. Her playing was clumsy, her understanding basic, But that rhythm, that was something else entirely. It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, a door that had been slightly cracked open into a room he never knew existed. He didn't say anything to her, not then. But as the class ended and the students packed up, he watched her leave, a thoughtful, curious look in his eyes. For Anya, the walk out of the room felt different. The safe, invisible cloak she had wrapped around herself suddenly felt very thin, and she had the chilling feeling that she was no longer alone in her secret. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. Anya was acutely aware of Mr. Harrison's eyes on her, a gentle but persistent gaze that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She didn't know if he was just being a good teacher or if he was watching her, waiting for another slip. Every time he walked past her keyboard, she would tense up, forcing her hands into a clumsy, unfamiliar shape. She overcorrected her posture, slumping so much that her back would ache by the end of class. She played the simple melodies with a new level of deliberate imperfection, adding extra fumbles and hesitant pauses. She was trying so hard to be a bad beginner that she was starting to feel like one, and a strange sense of loss began to creep in. The joy she had felt in her anonymity was now tainted by a constant, low-grade anxiety. Mr. Harrison, for his part, didn't mention the tapping incident. He continued his lessons with the same patient kindness, but he started asking different questions. Instead of, "Did you practice?" he would ask, "What did you think about the sound of that chord?" Or, "How did that rhythm make you feel?" They were simple questions, but they invited opinion, not just technical execution. Anya would always give a simple, one-word answer, shrugging her shoulders. Fine, okay, it was good. But she could see in his eyes that he wasn't just looking for a right answer anymore. He was looking for her answer, and she was determined not to give it. One Monday, a flyer appeared on the bulletin board in the music wing, printed in cheerful blue and white snowflakes. Northwood High Winter Showcase. It announced in big, bubbly letters. Mr. Harrison took a few minutes at the start of class to talk about it. He stood in front of the room, a hopeful expression on his face. "All right, everyone, I want to talk about the Winter Showcase," he began. "Now, I know some of you might be thinking, no way, not me, but I want you to consider it. This isn't a competition. There are no judges, no grades. It's just a chance to share what you've been working on, a chance to celebrate how far you've come." He looked around the room, his eyes soft. "I've been teaching this class for a long time, and I know how hard it is to get up in front of people. But I also know the magic that happens when you do. It's about sharing a piece of yourself. So think about it. There's a sign-up sheet on my desk. You can play anything you want, even if it's just the first 8 bars of Ode to Joy. The point is to be brave." A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A couple of the more confident ones whispered to each other, already planning what they might play. Anya, however, felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The Winter Showcase? That was the last thing on earth she wanted to do. It was a spotlight, a stage, an audience. It was everything she had run away from. She immediately decided she would not be signing up. Her mission was to be invisible, and this was the exact opposite of that. After class, as she was packing her bag, she noticed Leo still at his keyboard, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't playing. He was just staring at the keys, his face a mask of frustration. He had been trying to master a simple chord progression all week, and his fingers just wouldn't cooperate. Anya hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Hey," she said softly. Leo looked up, forcing a weak smile. "Hey, just trying to convince my fingers that they're actually attached to my brain." "Not having much luck?" "It'll come," Anya said, the words feeling a bit hollow even to her. "I don't know," he sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Mr. Harrison's all excited about the showcase, but what's the point? I'd just get up there and embarrass myself. My little sister can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star better than I can play anything." He looked down at his hands, which were resting limply on the keys. "I thought this would be fun, you know. I just wanted to be able to sit down and play a song. But it just makes me feel stupid, like I'm wasting my time. I think I'm just going to drop the class, take something else next semester." Hearing him say that hit Anya harder than she expected. She saw the genuine disappointment in his eyes, the flicker of a passion that was about to be snuffed out by frustration and shame. It was a feeling she knew all too well, but for different reasons. For her, the pressure had come from being too good, from the impossible expectations of others. For him, it came from not being good enough, fast enough. But the result was the same. The joy was being crushed. She remembered a time, long before competitions and recitals, when she would sit at her piano at home just for fun, plunking out little melodies, making mistakes and laughing them off. She saw that same pure, simple love for music in Leo, and the thought of him losing it felt wrong. She walked out of the music room and into the crowded hallway, but she barely noticed the noise around her. Leo's words echoed in her head. "It just makes me feel stupid." She thought about the years of her life that had been scheduled down to the minute, filled with practice. She thought about the nerves that would twist her stomach before every performance, the way her heart would pound not with excitement, but with the fear of making a single mistake. She had lost her love for the piano because it had become a job, a test she had to ace every single time. Leo was losing his love for it because he felt he was failing the test. Something shifted inside her. A small, warm spark ignited in the cold, tight knot in her stomach. It wasn't a grand, heroic feeling. It was quiet and defiant. It was a defiance of the fear that had been ruling her life, and a defiance of the idea that passion should have a price tag, whether it was perfection or progress. She thought about Mr. Harrison's words, "The point is to be brave." Maybe being brave wasn't about playing a perfect concerto. Maybe being brave was just about showing up, before she could talk herself out of it. She turned around and walked back toward the music room. Her footsteps were more purposeful now. The sign-up sheet was taped to the doorframe, a blank white page with a few names already scrawled on it. She took a pen from her bag, her hand feeling a little shaky. She thought about Leo and about the girl she used to be. She wrote her name on the line. Anya? Just her name. It looked small and lonely on the big page. Just as she was finishing, Mr. Harrison came out of his office. He saw her at the door and a warm smile spread across his face. "Anya, I was hoping some of you might sign up." He glanced at the sheet. "Wonderful. Are you excited?" Anya's heart was thumping, but she kept her voice calm and even. "I think so," she said, trying to sound like a nervous beginner. "Well, that's the spirit," he said, beaming. "Have you thought about what you might play? Remember, anything is fine." Anya looked down at her shoes, then back up at him, channeling all her acting skills. "I was thinking, maybe Ode to Joy? From the book?" Mr. Harrison's smile widened. He looked genuinely pleased, almost proud. "Anya, that would be perfect. It's a beautiful piece and you've been working so hard on it. I think that's a wonderful choice. Just wonderful." He gave her a little pat on the shoulder, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated encouragement. He had no idea. To him, she was just a shy beginner who had found the courage to share a simple song. He walked away, humming to himself, completely unaware of the storm she was about to unleash. Anya stood by the door for a moment longer, the pen still in her hand. The fear was still there, a flutter in her chest. But underneath it, the spark of defiance was burning a little brighter, warming her from the inside out. The night of the winter showcase arrived, and the school auditorium was transformed. Usually a place of squeaky chairs and dusty assemblies, it now hummed with a different kind of energy. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn from the lobby fundraiser and the low, excited murmur of hundreds of conversations. Parents held up their phones to record, little siblings fidgeted in their seats, and students backstage paced nervously, their whispers lost in the cavernous space. At the center of it all, on a raised platform bathed in a single warm spotlight, sat the school's grand piano. Its black, polished finish seemed to drink the light. Looking both elegant and intimidating, like a sleeping beast waiting to be awakened, Anya watched from the wings, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had changed into a simple, dark blue dress, nothing flashy, but it felt like a costume. A costume for a girl she wasn't sure she could be. She peeked through the heavy velvet curtain at the sea of faces. It was just a school talent show, not Carnegie Hall, but to her, it felt like the biggest stage in the world. She thought about backing out, about feigning sickness, and just disappearing. But then she remembered the look on Leo's face, the defeat in his voice. She wasn't just doing this for herself anymore. The first half of the show was a cheerful mix of acts. A girl sang a pop song with a backing track, her voice a little shaky but full of heart. A group of boys performed a comedy sketch that had the audience roaring with laughter. Then, the music portion began, and Mr. Harrison walked out onto the stage to a warm round of applause. "Thank you," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "It is my absolute pleasure to introduce some of the talented students from our music program tonight. These young people have been working incredibly hard, and they're here to share their passion with you." He introduced a few students from the school band who played a competent, if slightly squeaky, brass trio. Then came the performers from his piano class. A nervous-looking girl played "Mary Had a Little Lamb," her fingers plodding carefully through the melody. The audience clapped politely, encouragingly. Another boy, who Anya recognized from her class, played a simplified version of "Fur Elise," missing a few notes but beaming with pride when he finished. Each performance was met with the same warm, supportive applause. The expectation was set. This was a night for beginners, for learning, for trying. It was safe. Mr. Harrison returned to the microphone after the final beginner piece. "And now," he said, his smile particularly warm, "we have one more performer from our intro to piano class. She's a new student who has shown a great deal of courage by signing up tonight. Please welcome Anya Vance, who will be playing Ode to Joy." The name of the simple, iconic melody hung in the air. Anya took a deep, shaky breath. This was it. She walked out from the wings, the spotlight hitting her face like a physical force. The walk to the piano felt a mile long. The polite claps faded into a respectful silence. She scanned the crowd quickly and saw Leo sitting a few rows back. He gave her a nervous thumbs up. She gave him a tiny, almost invisible nod in return. This was for him. She reached the piano and sat on the bench. It was cool and smooth against her legs. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, a familiar, comforting feeling. The auditorium was completely silent now. Everyone was leaning in, expecting the sweet, triumphant, and simple opening notes of Beethoven's classic tune. They were ready to smile, to nod along, to appreciate the effort of a beginner. Anya closed her eyes for just a second, blocking out the world, the audience, the expectations. She thought about the years of pressure, the fear of a single wrong note, the way the music had become a cage. And then she let it all go. Her hands descended upon the keys, but the sound that exploded into the silent hall was not Ode to Joy. It was a torrent, a storm of raw, powerful, and fiercely complex notes that seemed to tear the very air apart. It was a Chopin etude, a piece known for its blinding speed and emotional depth. Her left hand thundered across the lower registers, creating a dark, rumbling foundation of sound, like a gathering storm. Over this tempest her right hand flew, a cascade of shimmering, lightning-fast notes that wept and sang with a passion that was almost painful to witness. A collective gasp went through the audience. People who had been smiling politely now sat frozen, their mouths slightly agape. The whispers that had started in confusion died instantly as the sheer force of the music commanded their full attention. This wasn't just good. It was breathtaking. It was technically flawless, but more than that, it was alive. Every note was filled with a story, a deep well of emotion, of sorrow, of longing, of a desperate, beautiful fight. In the front row, Mr. Harrison was staring, his face a canvas of pure shock. He looked down at the program in his hand, as if to confirm the name and the song title. Anya Vance, Ode to Joy. He looked back at the stage, at the quiet girl from his beginner class who was now channeling a musical genius he couldn't comprehend. His professional mind tried to process it, to find an explanation, but there was none. He could only sit and listen, his own awe growing with every passing bar. On stage, Anya was lost. She wasn't thinking about the notes or the technique. Her fingers were moving on their own, guided by years of practice and a heart that was finally free. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't playing for a judge or for an audience's approval. She was playing for the sheer, unadulterated joy of it. She was playing for the little girl who loved music before it became a burden. She was playing for Leo so he would see that the struggle was worth it. The music poured out of her, a release of everything she had been holding back for months. It was her true voice, finally speaking, the piece built to a frantic, breathtaking crescendo, a storm of sound that filled every corner of the auditorium. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Her fingers pressed down on the final, powerful chord, and the note hung in the air, shimmering and alive, vibrating through the stunned silence of the room. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. It was a moment of absolute, shared shock and wonder. Then, a single person in the back began to clap. It was a loud, sharp sound that broke the spell. It was followed by another, and then suddenly the entire auditorium erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roar. A wave of sound so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. People were on their feet, their faces alight with a mixture of disbelief and sheer admiration. They were clapping for the mystery, for the beauty, for the shocking, glorious revelation they had just witnessed. Anya opened her eyes. The roar of the crowd washed over her, but she felt strangely calm. She stood up, turned to face the audience, and gave a small, almost shy bow. She wasn't the triumphant Prodigy. She was just Anya, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. She walked off the stage, leaving behind a buzzing, questioning crowd and a piano that was still humming with the ghost of her performance. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wave of sound that followed her as she stumbled into the relative quiet of the wings. Backstage was a chaotic mess of wires, props, and wide-eyed students. The energy was completely different from the focused nervousness that had been there before. Now it was charged with a buzzing confusion. A girl from the glee club, who had been about to go on, just stared at her, her mouth hanging open. A stagehand, who was moving a microphone stand, stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes fixed on Anya as if she were a ghost. The other kids from her piano class, who had been congratulating each other with high fives, now stood in a silent cluster, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. They looked at her not as a classmate, but as something entirely foreign and unexplainable. Anya felt a wave of dizziness. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was draining away, leaving behind a hollow, trembling feeling. She had done it. She had torn down her own walls in the most public way possible. And now she felt terrifyingly exposed. All she wanted to do was find a dark corner and disappear. She backed away, trying to melt into the shadows, but a gentle voice stopped her. "Anya," she turned. It was Mr. Harrison. His face wasn't angry or confused. It was filled with a kind of profound, soft-spoken wonder. He didn't rush her. He just walked over slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. The noise of the crowd, the backstage chaos, it all seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them in a small, quiet bubble. "Anya, what was that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question, full of curiosity and a hint of reverence. Anya looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly. She couldn't find her voice. How could she possibly explain? How could she put into words the weight she had been carrying, the reasons for her deception? Mr. Harrison seemed to sense her struggle. He gently guided her over to a couple of stacked equipment cases, away from the main flow of traffic. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I have to know." All this time, the simple songs, the hesitant playing, was that all an act? Anya finally looked up at him, and she saw in his eyes not judgment, but a dawning understanding. She took a shaky breath, and the words started to come out, slowly at first, then in a quiet rush. "I didn't mean to trick anyone," she began, her voice cracking. "When they put me in this class, it was a mistake, but it felt like a gift. At my old school, it was all about competitions, about being perfect. I practiced for hours every day, not because I loved it, but because I was scared of not being good enough. The piano wasn't a friend anymore. It was a test I had to pass every single day. I burned out. I stopped feeling anything when I played. She paused, wiping at a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Moving here, getting put in the beginner class. It was the first time in years I didn't have that pressure. No one expected anything from me. I could just be a normal kid. I could be invisible, and it was wonderful. For the first time, I wasn't the prodigy, I was just Anya. Mr. Harrison listened intently, nodding slowly. "The rhythm you were tapping that day in class," he said, more to himself than to her. "And your posture. It all makes sense now. Your body knew, even when you were trying to hide it. Why did you do it tonight?" he asked gently. "Why that piece?" Anya thought of Leo. "I saw my friend Leo. He was so frustrated. He was going to drop the class because he felt stupid. I saw the same love for music in him that I used to have, and I hated seeing it get crushed. Mr. Harrison's speech about being brave. It got to me. I thought, maybe being brave isn't about playing a perfect concerto for judges. Maybe it's about showing someone that the struggle is worth it. I didn't do it to show off. I did it so he wouldn't quit." A look of deep admiration crossed Mr. Harrison's face. He reached out and put a hand on her shoulder. "Anya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for telling me. And thank you for that performance. It was one of the most beautiful things I have ever heard, not just because of your skill, but because of the heart behind it. You don't have to hide in my class anymore. But you don't have to be a prodigy either, unless you want to be. You can just be a musician. You can just play." The next day at school, everything was different. As Anya walked down the hallways, she was no longer a ghost. People didn't just stare. They smiled. They nodded. There was a new kind of respect in their eyes, not for a freakish talent, but for a story they now felt they were a part of. In the cafeteria, a group of girls waved her over to their table. In math class, the boy who sat next to her asked if it was true she played at Carnegie Hall. It was overwhelming, but it wasn't scary. It was nice. The biggest change was in the music room. When she walked into Intro to Piano, Leo was already there, but he wasn't frustrated. He was hunched over his keyboard, a look of intense concentration on his face, but there was a small smile playing on his lips. He looked up when she came in, his face lighting up. "That was incredible," he said, his voice full of genuine awe. "I've never heard anything like that." Anya felt a blush creep up her neck. "Thanks. I'm not quitting," he said firmly. "After hearing you play, I realized it doesn't matter how long it takes. I just want to get good enough to feel a little bit of what you feel when you play." Over the next few weeks, a new routine formed. Anya no longer had to pretend. Mr. Harrison, in a quiet agreement with her, officially moved her to the advanced study period, which was really just a free period where she could use the soundproof practice room. But she still spent a lot of time in the Intro to Piano class. She would sit next to Leo, not as a fellow beginner, but as a gentle guide. She would show him how to position his hands, not with the critical eye of a teacher, but with the patient encouragement of a friend. "Try curving your fingers like you're holding a small ball," she'd say. "It feels weird at first, but it makes it so much easier." She was sharing her knowledge, but in a way that felt helpful, not intimidating. She found her own balance again. In the afternoons, Mr. Harrison would give her the key to the advanced music room. It was quiet and peaceful, with a beautiful grand piano that looked out over the school's sports fields. Sometimes she would practice the difficult, complex pieces she had once abandoned, but now she played them for herself, without the pressure of an upcoming competition. Other times she would just play simple melodies, improvising, letting her fingers wander wherever they wanted. She was rediscovering the joy, the simple, pure fun of making music. She was no longer running from her gift, nor was she letting it define her. She was just living with it, like a part of her she had finally learned to be friends with, one afternoon. She was in the practice room, playing a soft, simple version of Ode to Joy, the song she was supposed to have played. She was playing it slowly, savoring each note, finding a new beauty in its familiar, triumphant melody. Through the window, she could see the students outside, laughing and throwing a football. For the first time, she didn't feel separate from them. She felt like she was a part of it all. She was Anya, the girl who could make a piano sing, but who also loved the sound of laughter in the afternoon sun. She had finally found her own music, and it was the most beautiful sound of all.